My name is Meg Walters, and I'm a senior manager of data science at Allstate. I'll tell you a little bit about my team while we're waiting for this to come up. The group that I run is called the Analytics Center of Excellence, and we're really the team that focuses on core capabilities for data science at Allstate, brings in new research from universities to make sure Allstate stays on the cutting edge, as well as we do a lot of education both within our larger data science group and around the enterprise, which is really what I'm here to talk to you about today. Do we have the clicker? Okay. Okay, looks like we're good. So I do also want to provide a little bit of context about my department and where we sit within the organization. So I work in a group called D3, which stands for Data Discovery and Decision Science, and we're about 350 people. We do serve the entire enterprise, going from sales to claims to human resources, pretty much anything you can think of in Allstate we touch. There are definitely different data and analytics groups and little pockets throughout the enterprise, but we are the core group and report up to the chief data officer. So in addition to managing and governing data and developing analytic solution, our department as a whole was tasked starting about 3 or 4 years ago with actually strengthening data and analytics talent and fostering an analytics-driven culture throughout the enterprise. I don't know how many of you have tried to do this. It's one of those things that's a lot easier said than done, but we found a few things that have worked and a few things that haven't, and I'd like to share those with you today. So if you weren't aware, or your organization doesn't have this problem, there is a pretty big disconnect between executives understanding that data and analytics are really important and can transform their business, but it's very hard to move from that understanding to actually having a workforce that's using data and analytics across the whole organization. So as we started in this journey, we realized there were a few different things that were at play here. There is definitely a component of fear. People are concerned in different roles that analytics is here to automate their jobs. They're not going to have jobs anymore if they're not experts in math. There's no room for them in the organization. So one of the first things we did have to do was address those fears. And the other really big thing I think that was hurting us was leaders around the organization not really understanding what analytics could do for them. There's a lot of buzzwords floating around. There's a lot of excitement. We were lucky in that our C-suite was very bought into data and analytics, but we had a lot of leaders saying, like, I don't really know what this is going to do for me. I don't know why I'd want to work with your group. And so we really had trouble building solutions and getting them out into the rest of the business. So I guess part of the reason why we really tried to push this from a leadership perspective, and when I say leadership perspective, I mean literally any person in the company who is a leader. Allstate has a phrase that we lead from every seat, so I guess here I'm saying data-driven culture is everyone's responsibility, but we did target manager groups and up. But even in a company like Allstate, we probably ultimately, even outside of my department, have maybe a couple thousand people working who would say they're comfortable with data and analytics. But Allstate's full workforce is about 45,000. So we're still a really, really small group and need this to be driven all around the company, not just within our group. So the way that we started appealing to the different leaders is really talking to them about their expertise. So they're the experts in the business. They're the ones who are talking to our customers, who are working closely with our claims adjusters, who are sitting in our call centers. And they're really the ones who can identify some of the highest impact problems. But we needed to figure out how to teach them enough about data and analytics that they could actually identify problems that made sense for us to solve. Secondly, we also obviously needed their help in implementing any solutions that we put out and really having people embedded within the business who are champions for any data and analytics solutions, and really wanted to involve them in the planning stages from very beginning to very end. And we created a framework for doing this, which I'll share a little bit later. So one thing I want to come here and say is I'm not going to talk through a way to upskill your leaders by having them start with, I don't know, algebra and go to calculus and take computer science and upskill your workforce this way. It doesn't work well. You can see a variety of things on here. But I think this really hit home when I was teaching one of our formal courses that we do offer, which I'll talk about a little bit. But I was facilitating a workshop that was kind of the culmination or the capstone day for a series of online courses that all leaders around the company had to take. So I was in the room 20 minutes early. This was pre-COVID, so putting out worksheets, getting markers out, all the things people would need to work throughout the day. And this woman walked in looking very ill and not well. So I walked over to her and I said, we have a lot of these workshops, we have them weekly. I can get you in another one, is everything okay today? And she looked at me and said, well, my leader told me that I had to take this and I had to complete this course in order to be a manager or a leader at this company. I was like, yes, that's true. All leaders are now required to go through this. She said, but I'm really bad at math. Am I going to be doing math up on the board here? Like 4 people? Is there going to be a test at the end of this? And it was at that point that it really hit home. It hadn't occurred to me that anybody would think this. It was actually a course where they came in and discussed case studies from within their business unit. And we helped them frame an analytics product around it. But that's where a lot of people in the organization immediately jumped and said, whoa, there's no room for me here. I'm being driven out because I don't have technical skills. And it took a lot of just making it clear what we actually wanted them to learn and do to get people a little bit more on board. So what I'm really going to emphasize here, you'll see I have technical skills really at the last step of this process, and I won't be focusing on those today. I really want to focus on these first 3 skills, which I talk about as problem defining problems that make sense with analytics, interpreting and questioning analytics that leaders receive, maybe from data scientists, maybe from folks in their group, and then teaching leaders how to actually design and make decisions using analytics and be confident in those decisions that something didn't go wrong. I'm happy to chat later with anybody who's interested about some of the upskilling we've done in technical skills, and I will touch on that briefly at the end. But really where I'd recommend starting with any leader, or really anyone who's starting to learn analytics, especially in a business context, is really focusing in on the fact that analytics needs to begin with a problem or an objective. I had a few years ago a product manager come to me who was working on a very cool, very innovative product for Allstate, very forward-looking. I was excited that they had come and wanted to integrate some analytics into their product, and so set up time to sit down with her and try to understand where analytics might add value. So, it said, what are you thinking of doing? What's your product going to do? How does analytics play a role? She said, well, I want machine learning in this product. And I was like, cool, we know machine learning. I can help you out with that. And I said, so what are you looking to do? And she said, well, we want our product to be smarter, and we want machine learning to make our product smarter. And that's where some people are starting. Their leaders are telling them, use this stuff. It's super cool. They're seeing commercials for it. They're seeing, auto-finishing in their text messages, but really, she had no idea where to start. So we were really able to say, okay, what are the core components of your product today, and where might analytics be able to enhance those components? So anytime a leader comes to me and says they want to use analytics for something or they need some analysis done, 100% of the time I ask them what problem you're trying to solve. Sometimes they really do have a problem, but sometimes it's pretty murky. So one of the ways that I have found helps them to narrow this down is to say, if you can improve one metric, one key metric, what would you improve? And they may come back with 15 metrics. Everybody wants to get more customers while making customers happy, but spending less time in the call centers. And you may get back a huge list. But really making it clear that we can work within constraints, but focus in on one key metric just really helps that discussion, and you can expand out from there. But I do find early in analytics journeys, leaders can be trying to solve for so many things that really no one thing is going to be successful, and it's really important to narrow down that most important thing that they want to do. The second step, once we have the problem defined, is to start thinking through how analytics can actually help that leader with their problem. So I like to break this up in 3 groups, and because I think a lot of leaders are thinking a lot about the predicting things and automating things, but what they don't necessarily realize is that analytics can be used to ideate about an initiative. Maybe we build some models just to see what things would likely improve their product, and then we can evaluate that later. We may be enabling something, which I think is where most leaders jump in, which is, hey, can you predict something so that we can automate this process and people can get through this work process faster? Or often, and I'm going to touch on this in a bit, they want you to evaluate an initiative, and in the worst case scenario, the initiative is over, it is done, and they come to you and they're like, hey, pull me the data to prove that this worked really well so that we can continue this initiative. And at this point, once the leader has really narrowed down the problem and what they want analytics to do for their problem, then you can start getting into some of the technical stuff. You're going to recommend probably a type of analytics to use. But I want to point out that these first two steps are really critical to do with the business. I have great data scientists on my team. We keep an open page where people can throw up projects they think would be good to do or think would help with the business. But when it comes down to it at the end, we're not close enough. It really is those business leaders that have to say, this is what I care about most, and this is, with some help, how I think analytics can help me. So at this point in time, you hopefully are at a place where you have a problem very well defined, and you've discussed with the leader how analytics is going to help them, and you've probably planned out some kind of analytics for them. So this is great, and a lot of folks at this point want to take off running, thinking that nothing could go wrong, and all of a sudden they come back and tell you the data has lied to them, and they're done with data, they're done with analytics, and this is the reason for it. One of the things that business leaders really do when you go through school, especially if you're not in a science field, you don't talk about experimental design, you don't talk about control groups, you don't talk about how analytics can go wrong. And one of the things that we see over and over is folks who are new to analytics thinking of things that aren't experiments as things that are. So here's an example. This is from my junior days, and a little ashamed to admit how this went, but luckily I had a good manager who stepped in and helped me out. But I had a business partner email me and say, hey, we're working on this program. It's been in place for a while. Can you go ahead and pull some numbers to show us how customers are retaining in the program versus the customers that aren't enrolled in the program? Are they more likely to leave Allstate? So me being naive, I assumed this person knew exactly what they wanted and were probably interested in the types of customers that were enrolling in their program and the types of behaviors that the people who would enroll in their program were. So I put this together, sent the email over to my manager, and he said, don't send this. Don't send this, it's going to go off really badly. And what these numbers showed was that the folks who were in this program defected from Allstate way more than the people who weren't in the program. But there was no experiment run. There was a major self-selection to go in the program, and the main selection there was that generally people, I don't know about you, I work for an insurance company and I'm not calling my agent all the time to talk about new options in my policy. So really the only people who were hearing about this program were the people who had just signed up with Allstate, which I know many of you are not from the insurance industries, but those new customers tend to be the ones who may be likely to leave anyway, may be really price sensitive and may leave after 6 months. So that was just the demographics of the group that were signing up for the program. It wasn't a reflection of the program. So really at that point was when we had to go back and say, do you really care about who's enrolling in your program, or are you trying to prove an impact? And of course, as my manager predicted, they wanted to show that this program was actually helping keep us customers at Allstate. So we were able to, even though we did not run an experiment at that point, we're able to do a little analysis, try to make two groups as similar as possible, and it did turn out their program was helping. But this is really one of the big issues that we see. The other watch out I would tell leaders for watch here is not just that after the fact analysis, but especially in a highly regulated industry, we do usually rollouts by state. We can't run experiments on how we price people for insurance. We will be shut down immediately. So, we may have to roll out by state, but if we're using that to evaluate a program, we've really got to think about how we do that and what could go wrong. So this is the one takeaway when folks take any kind of workshop or course with me in how to use analytics in their day-to-day life. I tell them, if you delete everything from your brain that you've learned today except for this one thing, get that one thing in your head, make sure you're not interpreting things as if they were an experiment. So want to call that out because this is, like I said, people will literally come and say, hey, my data lied to me. Is the data wrong? The data's not wrong, and they're really confused. And once they've had an experience like that and showed wrong results to their leadership, it's extremely hard to get them bought back in. So the third thing, once we've kind of provided some formal structure around watchouts, how can analytics help you? We found that it's really helpful to provide folks with a framework to think through their end-to-end analytics project. So many of us, especially if you're leaders in the data science space, you're probably used to doing many of these steps, whether you're thinking about them or not. It's just the logical progression of how we do things. But for people who are new to this or new to any kind of science or just thinking through problems like this, they tend to immediately jump to the gather the data step, which you'll notice really we've missed probably what I would call the four most important steps that will, if done correctly, save you a large amount of time. Because when folks start with gathering the data and then running an experiment, analyzing it, they finish this after 6 months, realize, we didn't really gather the data we wanted, we didn't focus in on the problem right, so now we have all this data, but need to run a whole nother experiment, and this really draws out these projects. So we don't provide this. I mean, this is a nice looking slide. We actually have a worksheet that we hand out that we take to leaders as we start to engage them in an analytics project. And there's prompting questions under each of these type of things to really have them slow down, think through, and make sure they're designing their project in a way that they will get reliable results, but they'll also get everything they need. So I'd highly encourage you, this is a very lightweight thing to do. If you don't want to do any of the prior, education or any of those kind of learnings, provide some kind of framework for thinking through these projects, especially as you expect people in the business to start pulling their own data and maybe doing these things for themselves. So I've talked quite a bit about what to teach, so to speak, or what to enable people to do and some of the watchouts. But we've tried a number of venues to actually teach people this stuff and to provide enough continuing education that folks are successful when they move forward with analytics. What most people think of when they think of venues for learning, especially in the corporate world, is we tend to immediately jump to classroom training. I come from an academic background. I'm not going to say classroom training is terrible or that you shouldn't do it, but it can be a reality that many companies don't have the money to design a course or bring in course. They don't necessarily have the time to put all their leaders through a course, and it's just not always practical. I will, for those companies that are able to do this, or maybe you have leadership who's highly invested and willing to say, yes, we can do some kind of training. We were actually able to develop a class. We call it Leading with Analytics, and it was co-developed with Northwestern University School of Management. And they developed a series of online modules that the business folks take that cover in a lot more detail the past couple slides that I did. And the culmination of that class is an all-day workshop where leaders are expected to come in with a problem that they think can be solved using analytics from their area of expertise, and then they work with analytics professionals to go through that analytics decision-making process, have someone who could sit next to them and kind of poke holes in things and say, did you think about this? Did you think about that? And even just getting them these problems, or getting them to think about these problems, brought in more work to our department than we could handle. One of the biggest questions at the end of the class, at the end of the day, you're like, do you have questions? Are there things that are still not clear? And their biggest question is like, how do I get my project going? What do I need to do? Who do I talk to? Can you help me? And they leave really feeling like, okay, this could do something for my area, and I know at least somewhat how to get started. Maybe all the steps aren't in place, but they at least know how to think through this. So outside of classroom training, let's say you have done this or you haven't. The one thing I want to caution you with classroom training is if that is what you do, don't have it end there. I'm sure all of us have taken courses in the past, whether in school or some online course, or you go to a conference and you're super excited about what you've learned and you're like, I'm going to start this tomorrow. And you get back, you've got a full inbox full of emails, the day-to-day stuff just, comes on, and you don't necessarily have a chance to prioritize those learnings or put them in action. So I would encourage you, regardless of the kind of your training you're doing, to make sure that you have a lot of venues for learning. On the presentation and workshop side, we have bi-weekly sessions where we actually bring together business professionals with some of our analytics experts and talk about how they used analytics in their area of expertise. Having that person from the business paired with someone from analytics really helps hit things home that like this isn't just us coming and telling you guys what to do. Having the leader really talk through their problem and how they were involved in the process helps build up a lot of that confidence. I will caution you on going overboard with these. We used to have these 2-3 times a week. It was overload. I'd say curate them a little bit more, and keep them interesting. And we actually link all of ours. We asked all of our speakers to link back to that analytics decision-making process to just further solidify how we're having people think through their analytics projects. The kind of lightweight things that I don't know are necessarily going to get your group completely immersed in analytics, but I think that have been very helpful for us. We have every year, a data and analytics week where we actually fly all of our data and analytics people to Chicago normally. It's been virtual the past couple of years. And there are a variety of presentations and workshops and some classroom trainings during that time. But one of the things that we actually get the most participation from is a demo fair. So at the demo fair, in person, folks can walk up to booths and interact, and there's like a 5 to 10 minute demo that's intended to teach them one core concept about analytics that we would like them to know. We keep these pretty lightweight and fun. For example, last year my team built a rock, paper, scissors app that used computer vision. You know, the person would come in and they'd do this in front of their camera, and they'd play against a computer. And it was actually a really interesting way to teach them about data size, data collection, data quality, label quality. You know, we asked folks from our department and around the enterprise to take a bunch of photos of themselves doing this, upload them to folders that we had labeled as rock, paper, scissors. And you've got people doing really cute things like there's an actual pair of scissors in the scissors folder, there's a stack of paper in the paper folder. But we were able to pull those out and be able to talk about label noise, be able to talk about concepts like maybe the label's not clear. What if you have scissors made out of a rock? And really start to talk about some of these fundamental concepts that are coming up in our data, but in a way that's pretty easy, pretty fun, and people walk away and they really remember this stuff. I still have people come chat with me like, are you guys the group that did the rock, paper, scissors? That was really interesting. I'm now interested in doing computer vision. And some of those lessons really stick. So don't think that everything needs to be like formal, long training. Sometimes these really short, quick demos, as long as you have a targeted, like this is the 1 or 2 takeaways that we want people to leave from our booth with, they have a good time and they do actually remember those. There's many things we've done, but one of the last things I'd really encourage you to do as far as a venue of learning is spin up some type of community of practice. So this can look a lot of different ways. I know some organizations have blogs or actual like spaces people can go to be a part of a community of practice. We actually do ours very lightweight through Microsoft Teams. We have certain teams people can join for certain interest groups. We have a Allstate Python users group and an Allstate R users group that have a very healthy rivalry, as you'd expect. But there's also user groups for people who are interested and passionate in data visualization or business intelligence. And it really provides a place for people to come and ask questions. And really, especially in an organization as large as ours, they're really getting answers in real time. Folks may want to take a break for 10 minutes from their work and they'll check out some of the user groups they're in and say like, oh, I've done this, I can answer that question. And really it expands the learning from just kind of the core team that's done the initial teaching to everyone else. It gives people a low pressure environment in which to come ask questions that maybe they don't want to email the head of our department with or talk to at a very high level. They can just throw their questions in and learn something. We also use the communities of practice to curate certain talks. So the leaders of these communities may say, okay, we're hearing a lot of buzz about this tool in the Python users group. Let's get in an expert and actually give a talk on that, and we can advertise it via that group. So these focus communities that are somewhat informal but very focused, we found also really help just that continuing education and that continuing learning to keep that going forward and just keeping analytics kind of at the forefront of people's minds. So I touched on some of this before, but really the key way to get people interested in this stuff is to keep the content relevant and engaging. I come from a theoretical math background, and I'll sit through an hour lecture where someone's proving something out. This is not a good idea. Honestly, if you have equations on the slide, you've probably lost 90% of the audience. So really make sure, even if sometimes it feels a little silly, keep things relevant, keep them engaging. I touched on already having some of your business collaborators come in and co-present with you and give their perspective on the analytics project. We've also found that providing case studies and places for people to come together in groups and work through them helps a lot. We've built a couple different case studies that are essentially business simulations where we provide some data that's been analyzed and that there are some plots and there's some summary statistics and they're told things about the data, told things about a problem to solve, but really work within their groups to figure out, okay, what is this data even telling me? What decision would I make? Where could this go wrong? And really give them that safe space and very low stakes space to come in and practice that, okay, I've got the analytics. How do I get to the decision, or what should I watch out for as I make that decision? I mentioned rock, paper, scissors as a fun example to demonstrate complex concepts. You can't go too wild with this. Eventually people will say, like, this department is fun and games, let's not work with them. It's always some kind of joke. But as long as you do really have some targeted learning that you want to get across with these, just fun, different things, it's actually very helpful. I chuckle when I look at this picture. We actually had another group who was looking into image search and how we could search over our images. So they decided, hey, we're going to search for any of our claims images where there's a dog hanging out in the car. So lo and behold, they found a couple images where somebody's dog was in the car when they were taking a picture of a fender bender or something. And that was a fun way for people to remember, yes, we have these capabilities. But again, lightweight, talking about car accidents gets pretty heavy pretty quick. So doing hey, we looked for dogs instead of the certain type of damage made people remember that this was a capability we had, but again, kept it a little more lightweight. So I just want to reiterate a few things as well as provide some additional tips and things that we learned along the way. One thing that not everyone realizes is that you can get a huge amount of benefit by actually making your data and analytics professionals go through the same trainings that are given to the business. Let me tell you, you'll get some groans at first, like, I know what linear regression is, I know how to make decisions using analytics, but for them to learn the language that's being taught to the business and understand how people throughout the business are learning about analytics, it really bridges that communication gap that we often see between data scientists and business leaders. Like sometimes you come in and you feel like they're having two totally different conversations that are missing each other. So have your data professionals take the courses or attend the workshops, attend the trainings that are offered for the business, and really have them start to understand what are the big problems in the business, what are the concerns using analytics, and what language is being taught. So I've taught a number of our formal coursework over the past couple of years at Allstate, and I have learned so much through that. Like, yes, every time, I have to talk about linear regression, I'm like, yeah, I know this. But understanding from a business leader's viewpoint what they've done has made me 1,000% better at my job. So really encourage your professionals to do that. Secondly, do provide a framework for designing an analytics project. I showed you an example of ours before. It can be lightweight, it can be informal. Like I said, a one-pager that just says, like, have you checked these boxes? Have you thought about these things? Can save a lot of work in the long term by doing a little bit of work up front. Just reiterating before you jump into what types of analytics there are, what analytics can do, really focus on telling those leaders to start with a problem and narrowing in that problem as much as they can. Then you can move to teaching them to ask the right questions, and at this point, they can then jump into their data and analytics decision-making framework to progress on their project. Make learning continual so that, again, when you do formal learning, you are continuing to learn throughout time, and people, as they slowly start to build up confidence, will get more and more out of those learnings. And as you're doing any kind of formal teaching, use case studies that are relevant to your organization. Many of the academic things online, they'll make up a fake company, and that's cool and stuff, but it doesn't take a lot of time to find not even fake case studies, but times maybe the organization has made a mistake and treated something as if it was an experiment and it wasn't. You can have people really talk through that and say, okay, if you had done this, what would you have changed at the beginning? What would have been different? What questions didn't the people who are in charge of this ask? And yes, we have permission from anyone who's got one of these case studies. A lot of it, maybe some of us early in our careers who made some mistakes. But it's a really good way to get people engaged and say, oh, like this really is relevant to my job, and as a decision maker, I could have fallen in this trap, and here's how now I have these tools to work my way out of it. So that's what I have. Happy to elaborate further on any of these subjects, and wish you the best on your journey to get more of your organization to be data and analytics driven.
Thank you, Meg. We have time for some questions.
Hey, Meg. Thanks for sharing your experience. I'm curious. I'm Randy. I'm at Dell. A debate we often get into within the data science community is how much of this educational effort should be on the backs of the data scientists versus how much we should rely on. There's so many online training materials and things like that, and just kind of encouraging people to go find things, because we're still in conversations where we still get like, well, what really is the value of data science and analytics? Like, you guys are kind of expensive, like that it seems like a lot of investment. And so like for people who are still constantly trying to prove their value, to take 10, 20% of their time developing training materials and things like that is a big cost benefit analysis that we think through a lot. And so I'm curious how y'all thought about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In our case, that's actually one of the reasons we partnered with Northwestern, because they curated a course. Like, we really talked through, hey, these are the things we need to get across, and these are a lot of the pitfalls that we're seeing. But for us, it did make more sense to say, they've already got a lot of course content. Can they curate something Allstate specific? And then our data scientists were primarily involved in the actual interaction sessions. So that would take, it would be a full day for data scientists. We had maybe 2 on it once a week. So it was a big investment, but we are constantly looking for some of those trade-offs. At this point, another good type thing to do is, if you have any kind of learning platform where you can at least just curate resources that are already out there, but at least curate the ones that are relevant for your organization, that's really helpful. If you go out there and search, like I know a lot about data science, and I still have a really hard time being like, is this course going to be useful? I probably need to look through half of it. But even if you can curate some of those resources and just say, hey, we'd recommend you do these, and they are going to be relevant, that's helpful.
Hi, Meg. My name is Jillian. I'm at Domino. Thanks so much for speaking today. One of the questions that I have is, on one of the slides you mentioned technical skills kind of being something. I'm just curious, like, what business leaders are coming to you wanting to get like up-leveled? Like, what are those technical skills that they're like, I don't know much about this. Can you help me out?
I would say primarily the technical skills that business leaders, or maybe not the leaders themselves, but that they're interested in having the people below them be able to do, is probably really more on the business intelligence front, and knowing how do we find data within our organization. This may not be a problem for some organizations, but if you're a big company, this is very hard. So they're really interested in, like, how do I find the data that I need or identify what's already there? And then really, like, basic analytics. Can I get summaries of this? Can I get distributions? And those are a lot of that. Just business intelligence is more what the business is interested in. And then as they kind of build that up, they may be more interested in building some models, running experiments, and that's where they'd be more likely to partner with a data science group. But I would say, like, I know there's a lot of no-code, low-code coming out in those spaces now. And that has been really great to get out for those business leaders who do just need some reporting and some numbers and want to start making decisions using data, but don't have the time to build up, coding skills.
Hi, Meg. I'm Kyle. I work with Bloomberg Industry Group. And I'm wondering, your center of excellence, was it, like, what led to it? Was it a cold start? Did you kind of accumulate things that might have already been in existence? Was there a mandate? Just curious how that process to sort of where you're at now occurred.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will try to keep this relatively short because I can talk. I've got a lot of opinions about the team. So just for some history, a little bit of our department, we actually started out as just a function within the actuarial organization at Allstate, which I think for insurance companies, this tends to be what it is. So for a while, we were really focused on pricing. We hired, experts in pricing, and we're kind of pushing the boundaries of what you could do, how we could build better models, and that type of thing. And as we started expanding, and we had some big wins in pricing, which gave us credibility to expand to other parts of the organization, but we started to realize that we didn't necessarily have all of the skills in our organization that we needed to serve all of these different areas. This was also the time when deep learning was becoming a really big buzzword, but couldn't do much of anything yet. This was first spun up in about 2015. So deep learning was big buzzword, but we really saw this probably, if this stuff ends up working, this is going to be a really big thing, and if we're not ready for it, we're going to get hit in the face and be left behind. So the Center of Excellence was actually initially just started as not quite an academic research group, but started as a very small group of people who collaborated with a couple of universities, and really the point of the collaborations were to upskill our data scientists on some of the new and latest methodologies so that they could push that out to the enterprise. So once there was some value created there, we started to expand into the technology space. The Center of Excellence, is the one who convinced leadership, like, we need GPUs, we need bigger computing clusters. A lot of times we make the case for it, bringing in tools. So really just started to continually expand. And as we've had wins and, now point to things like, hey, we're using computer vision in claims, that all started within our groups. Like, we have this computing cluster because our group made the case for it, and now we're where we need to be a couple of years out. So I would advise to start small because the value, it's hard to make a case for a group when you're basically promising that they're not going to see value for 3 years or so. But as you start to see those values, you can expand, and now we are beyond just an R&D group and provide core capabilities and education and a lot of technology consultation too.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I was curious to see two questions, how long has it taken to get the program going? And then also what's your success rate as far as across the organization of you guys actually kind of embedding yourself in there?
Great question. So as far as getting the program going, I will admit we had some major help coming down from the executive team who actually said, if you want to be at manager level or above in the organization, you have to take this program within a year. So that helped the initiatives. But I'd say before that, we had a slowish start where we were offering seminars and starting to get them a little more business focused and at least doing presentations on business case studies. But it's definitely slow. I'd look for some places where you can maybe more curate some learnings and work closely and build a good relationship with a maybe specific team or business area so that you then have that to say, hey, look, this is successful, but this is successful because we got this area to buy in and learn with us and be part of the process. So I'd say building up slowly, and then it has pretty much exponentially expanded beyond that as we've had more and more case studies. So I'd say your second question was about just how much we've seen out of it. I would say at this point, we have seen a lot. Most business areas are very invested in data and analytics to the point that they are asking us for capabilities that are unrealistic at this point and just where technology is, or asking just for more resources than we literally have, which is actually, I think, a good problem in a lot of ways. It's created other problems in that now different teams are like, well, we're just going to build our own little data science team because you guys don't have enough resources. So there's been now some coordination that has to be done across the organization to make sure there's not duplicate work. But ultimately, being able to show those successes has just brought a lot in. And once you have a success with a business unit, they realize they've got 10 other problems for you, and it grows very quickly.
Hi, Meg. This is Jennifer from NVIDIA. I'm curious to get your perspective. If you look at more of the kind of bleeding edge frameworks today around conversational AI, large NLP recommender systems, or graph neural networks, what do you think will be most impactful for the industry, for insurance specifically?
For insurance specifically, I think at this point, a lot of it's going to be in the conversational AI space. Part of that reason is just the massive amount of customers that we have, and right now especially, Allstate is an older company. It's taking them a little longer to move. They're not moving quite as fast as I'd like. So I would say 95% of customers are still contacting us by phone, which means we have an enormous amount of voice data, an enormous amount of transcripts coming in. The other thing we've really noticed is that customers, especially if they're, let's say, in an accident and they're pretty nervous about things and want some reassurance, they don't want to interact with something that's just like asking them a bunch of questions. They have a lot of details they want to be able to give you. They really want something that's customized for them. So it's definitely someplace that we're interacting, or that we're focusing in on a lot. As far as graph networks and stuff, that's actually something we're starting to explore in. There's obviously applications in fraud and in some other spaces, but right now we've just got so much customer interaction, pretty much for us, none of which is automated, even if customers would like it. That conversational AI is could be a huge win for us in building up those capabilities slowly.
Thanks, Meg. Another Jennifer, this time from Minitab. So with all these upskilling everyone on data analytics is so great, but kind of what we were talking about earlier about the IT part of it.
Yep.
How is that relationship with your group with IT? Because now these people are actually looking to access data that maybe IT never had to get ready for them.
Great question. I chuckle a little bit because we don't have things fully solved. My group is actually one of the ones that tries to form that bridge with IT. So we started out interestingly where a lot of the actual IT analytics products were initially formed in our department by data scientists, data engineers, and we're not scaling for the enterprise. So initially it took a lot of shopping around to say this is the value of what we can do today, but if we're scoring these models on millions of things a day, this is not going to work. And really starting to move some of that into the IT organization has helped. I don't know that we've totally solved this. I do think we have a much better relationship than we did in the past, and they are recognizing that they need to bring people in who are familiar with the kind of end-to-end analytics process, because I think that was really where we struggled a lot in the beginning, is we got IT on board for deploying stuff, and maybe monitoring after it was deployed, but if it wasn't something that was going into production tomorrow, IT was like, this isn't our thing. So really starting to talk them through that end to end, and that hey, 90% of this work is being done before deployment, at least somewhat helped.